It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears.
Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today is a bonus episode. Today we get to kick back and answer some of your questions, which you keep sending us, which I'm really happy about because it's fun to do this and it's self-indulgent and nice.
And we love being self-indulgent and nice.
We do, yes. We're recording this on Easter and on Trans Day of Visibility. So for those who celebrate both of those, a happy holiday to you all.
And shout out to the person on whatever social media it was who made the egg cracking joke.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of making that joke, but I knew that somebody had already made it. I could make the, shout out to all of those who are planning on starting a new life with some new holes. But I thought that would be
terrible.
I mean, all the paintings of Doubting Thomas had an effect on me. But anyway, having broken the ice with some of my classic humor,
all right,
we can just sort of dive into it, I suppose. Questions start.
Yeah. Do you want me to read the first question, or do you want to read the first
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Questions in order. I can't believe Chaos and Catnet is the first podcast episode that itself qualifies as Wizards versus Lesbians. I found the discussion on the limitations of Death of the Author really interesting. I wonder if y'all have changed your mind on Death of the Author as a concept since.
All right.
So first of all, I'm not actually sure this is the first podcast episode that itself qualifies as Wizards versus Lesbians, but
I mean, it was one of the ones. It was the earliest one where we spent most of the episode arguing, and
as opposed to Light from Uncommon Stars, where we just spent a big chunk of the episode arguing.
Yeah, no.
Okay, that's fair.
It's certainly one of the ones where we were self-conscious about arguing. But and usually I edit those out. But the other thing about that one is that there wasn't enough else to talk about, so I had to leave in most of the fighting. But
Death of the Author.
The short answer is that I haven't changed my mind about Death of the Author. So I think there are two different ways that we tend to use Death of the Author when we're talking about books. And the first one basically boils down to the author's intentions don't matter at all. What the author thinks the book means doesn't matter at all. The text exists as an object, and the interpretation of the text is down to the individual reader. So every reader has a different artistic experience, which is valid. And that version of Death of the Author, that's pretty core to my understanding of how art and communication works. So no changes there.
Right. If you have to go to, if you have to settle your interpretation argument by going, well, the author said on Twitter X, then the author has failed to effectively make their case.
Yes.
And thus, that could be disregarded.
Now, the other version of the author is dead that we tend to use more as a joke is we can't talk about anything about the author's life experience and background, which is actually not part of the Death of the Author concept.
No.
Classically speaking, but it's generally something that we do just in order to not speculate about a living person's deal.
Right.
Which seems rude.
Yeah, it does, and kind of creepy. And, the thing is, and otherwise, if it's not a living person, then the author really is dead, so
you can talk about their biography all that you want, as we did with Travel Light, for example.
Yeah, and, I think that it is sometimes useful you can look at the author's biography and how that might inform what they are saying. And that can sometimes change your interpretation. I remember as a child I was in high school when I found out that Narnia was supposed to be a Christian allegory. And this was very startling to me. And, that is something where the author's biography really does influence one's reading, but it doesn't really, that's not actually about the author's interpretation is the only valid one. It's just, this is interesting information to take into account.
Yes, and that's also a case where if you hadn't been brought up without being exposed to Christianity at all, that would also have been pretty obvious, probably even without the.
I was exposed to Christianity. I grew up in the Bible Belt.
Well, yeah, I mean, we just
and they're
have
not
this...
talking about the Hebrew Bible.
Yes, but yeah, no, the dawning realization that Aslan is Jesus sort of, does change one's opinion of things. But yeah, I think that just about covers it. Yeah, no, that's our understanding of Death of the Author is pretty firm.
All right, you want to read the next one?
If wizards and lesbians have an established antagonistic relationship, what can we say about the relationship between lesbians and generals? Are there more lesbians versus generals books, or was it a weird that it happened twice type of deal? You wouldn't want to waste your time having beef with like a lieutenant. Yeah, I mean, this is probably an issue that arose because of our extremely floppy definition of wizard.
Right.
Because I'm thinking of the two off the top of my head would be these burning stars and Santa Olivia. But like basically manipulative authority figure who is bending reality to their own whims by the use of power and controlling the flow of information. That's the head of an army as much as it is a wizard, and so it works out.
Which now I'm starting to think, was John Kai-shek a wizard? Douglas MacArthur?
Oh, Douglas MacArthur was absolutely a wizard. I'm not kidding. That man's understanding of reality was mystical.
That's fair. That is absolutely fair.
At the very most generous, yeah. But yeah, no. I think that it would not be weird that it happened more than twice, and we continue to have lesbians in conflict with generals. And of course, I imagine that we'll also come across a few lesbian generals in the fullness of time.
I would be deeply disappointed if we didn't, honestly.
Exactly. Yeah, and actually, I think that technically the Nine Fox Gambit also falls under that. I think Judah's a general, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, 3.
Yeah, no, he's yeah. I mean, he also does have like actual reality warping powers. So
yeah, there you go, a wizard and a general at the same time.
And Kujin is just straight up a wizard.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Which wizard is the worst at being a wizard?
I found this one somewhat difficult. I didn't know whether I should limit it to just of the books that we've covered or to wizards in general.
I think either could be interesting.
In terms of sheer ineffectuality, because this isn't the worst wizard as in the most evil or the most corrupt wizard. It's
right,
the one
but this
who's
is worst at
being a wizard. Let's see here. I have a lot of candidates. Out of the ones that we've done, I think possibly the from High Times and the Low Parliament, everybody
right
is so ineffectual with their use of magic and authority that I think that's sort of a showcase of like inept wizardry from all angles. I mean, the English delegation to the European Parliament who are wearing floaties under their robes,
right.
I think count. The wizard from Margot Lie's Guide to Dueling Unprepared,
yes,
who gets beaten and is like, "Hey, you beat me. Let's all go out for milkshakes."
The wizard from Uncommon Charm, who is actually a wizard and who, but the protagonist's mother has like completely made ineffectual.
Yep, definitely. The evil Chinese wizard from Tomoe Gozen who just gets owned.
Oh, that's right. He might actually win worst at being a wizard because he doesn't even he's not even able to have any pull over the plot, really.
Yeah, he falls out of the book like a third of the way through.
He mostly exists exists to be the catalyst, and the rest of the series is just backstory that never comes up again.
Mm-hmm. My favorite bad wizard from outside of our purview would be Radagast the Brown. From the Lord of the Rings books.
I do have a soft spot for him, though.
Well, I mean, yes, but like as wizards go, he is like embarrassing on a number of levels.
Right, exactly.
Which makes him probably a person that you would rather hang around with than the more, than the more effective wizards from those books. But
yeah, and of course, as far there's also movie Akio.
oh yes, yeah, movie Akio is hilarious. But yeah, clown wizard movie Akio. But yeah, no, being off screen for like 90% of the text is a fate worse than death for a wizard, I would say. So
Yeah.
a wizard that barely shows up and doesn't do much is got to be high up there.
I mean, for most of The Last Unicorn, it's Schmendrick, but then he gets his act together, so.
Right. Schmendrick too. I considered Schmendrick, but he turns out to be a fine wizard in the end. If you had to choose one of the books or series you've covered on the podcast to get a film or TV adaptation, which would it be? Any thoughts on who you'd want to be involved in making it? Directors, producers, screenwriters, animation studios, actors, etc. I have some ideas, but I want to preface them by saying that I'm not really a movie guy, and not really a TV guy, and I don't really know who any actors are.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be very helpful for directors or actors.
Yeah, I'm not really gonna. I'll make some stabs. But do you want to go first answering this one?
Well, I feel like Max Gladstone stuff would make really good miniseries, like prestige TV miniseries.
In the sense that it would be better than them being books, yes.
I mean, I enjoyed them more than you did by far, and you enjoyed Empress of Forever when you read the first time you read
Well,
it.
no, I mean they're what I mean is that they're long and highly episodic. So
Right, and so I think that they would work well for that.
sort of SF original series kind of stuff. Or I mean honestly, I could see somebody making The Road or whatever it's called,
Last Exit.
Yeah, I could see somebody making Last Exit into like a sort of The Last of Us / Walking Dead style
Yeah,
TV series. Yeah, that could work.
that could work. I think for most of these, oh, you know what? Actually, the Priory of the Orange Tree would probably make a pretty good, like, whoever's making the Wheel of Time miniseries or TV series or whatever, they could also probably do a pretty good job with Priory of the Orange Tree.
Yeah, I would prefer that to your sort of standard Game of Thrones fare. It would be a sort of a more interesting take on that.
Yeah.
So let's see. I've got Michelle Yeoh as Lin Chung in the Water Outlaws miniseries. I think that would make very good episodic TV. I think that as She Who Became the Sun, in addition to making a good tactics game, would make a good TV drama series.
Yeah.
Sort of historical drama in the Game of Thrones vein. I have, again, no idea who plays it or who directs it because I don't know anything. I think Siren Queen could be like an Oscar bait movie. The Oscars love movies about movies.
About movies. Yeah. I think that one's a little hard, though, because, I mean, part of what makes Siren Queen work so well is the narrative and, first-person narrative voice. And, like, because, and I think losing that is going to... You'd have to have a really good director, I think, who could manage to substitute other stylistic things for that.
Yeah, the guys who did Everything Everywhere All at Once could probably do it. One of the reasons that I say it is because I have so many striking like visual images in my mind from that book. I think that if you got a really inventive director to do it, you could do that. And a lot of that work could be done with voiceover and stuff like that. Although, of course, there's always a limit to how effective that could be.
I would love to see the weird indie comedy movie version of The Dyke and the Dybbuk.
That would be fun. Yeah, no, sort of a Diablo Cody kind of an approach to The Dyke and the Dybbuk could be fun. I think that I want Valhalla to be made into a really stupid 90s action movie.
Yes.
And I would also like a really serious avant-garde Russian director like Tarkovsky to do an Amatka.
Ooh, yeah, that would be really cool. Again, that you would some of the world building stuff to convey, but I guess you could just like show people writing, and you need that serious avant-garde director. You know what also would actually make, I think, a really cool, because it has great visuals, and and you could do a lot of fun things with the actors if you had the right actors. TV miniseries, like prestige TV miniseries, would be The Space Between Worlds. There was all the cool stuff in Orphan Black, which I saw all of like 2 episodes of, but a lot of Tumblr GIFs, so that counts. Where, you know, you have one actor getting to play different versions of themselves. And I think that, you know, you could just do a lot of, the actors could have a lot of fun with that in Space Between Worlds. And so that would also end up being fun for the audience.
Sure. Last thing, Dawn Hounds anime. Don't know why.
No, that could work. It's got the right kind of visuals to be a good anime, I think.
Yeah, and like the cover of that book was so lame that I would really love to see what like a really good like anime environmental designer could do with it, because it was sort of like the inspired weirdness of the setting was let down by that. And you know, I'd like to, yeah, show me how a bird with 4 wings flies. I'd like to see it.
Actually, if we're talking about anime, there's also, I would be very curious to see the anime version of Battle of the Linguist Mages.
Oh God, I can just picture it.
Right?
And it's so low budget. It's so
Right.
low budget. You know, there's so little actual animation in it. Oh, there's so much CG transition stuff. Okay.
Okay. So, next question. Can you talk about witches? Distinctions between them and wizards, their place in the Wizlish genre, overlap with bad moms, etc.
Yes, and that one comes to us from Kiana. The rest of, so far, they've all been Tumblr Anons. This is Tumblr Kiana.
This is a great question, actually, because it's something I've been thinking about.
Well, why don't you hit me with it? Because I think that you probably have more developed thoughts on it than I do in that case.
So I think that the overlap with bad moms is key. Because, you know, to some degree, the wizard, even when the wizard is a female character, is kind of playing the bad dad. It's, you know, super manipulative and powerful, but it's manipulative in a different way than what we think of as bad mom. And then, you know, it's often like more playing on like your self-esteem and your desire to impress. And witches often do, I think, when you've got like your bad witch character, or that really is tying into ideas of bad moms. I can think of a couple of ones with gay or trans male characters, with bad moms that do kind of feel like an inverse Wizards versus Lesbians, where they're dealing with a lot of the same themes. Unfortunately, the title's escaping me, so you'll have to do a jingle about it later.
The story in question is My Mother's Hand by Dante Luay.
Where they're dealing with a lot of the same themes of sort of how do you come to grips with yourself, and how can, you know, your queerness or your connection to other people free you from this abusive, overshadowing figure. But the relationship ends up being much more of a sort of, you know, I gave birth to you kind of, thus I own your, thus I have this authority over your body. That I think is much more about bad moms. And part of that is because, you know, Wizards versus Lesbians, when the wizard figure is male, like, you know, the classic wizard is, in most cases, though, shout out to Girls of Paper and Fire for not doing this, but in a lot of these cases, these stories don't want to be about sexual violence. And so while there's a really creepy overtone to all the relationships, it ends up being much more paternal. And I think that when you have, just because of the way our culture is, it is easier to tell a story with a bad mom who has like weird, creepy ownership over your body, without it immediately calling up the specter of child abuse, unless you're somebody who, you know, has read stuff about child abuse, in which case it absolutely does.
Yeah.
So these are some of my thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I would maybe add, first of all, like, you know, when we're talking about wizards and witches, it's impossible not to be some gender essentialist. So,
right.
You know, this is not necessarily our thoughts, but this is the way.
Right. This is very much talking about like what the cultural ramifications are in like just our modern American culture.
Wait, we live in a society? Right, exactly. But it makes me think about, I also want to sort of bring in like who in the real world is likely to call themselves a witch and who in the real world is likely to call themselves a wizard. And And like people who are likely to call themselves wizards are either going to be, you know, are tend to be either like petty cult leaders,
KKK leaders.
KKK leaders.
I guess you could argue that's the same thing, but
Yes. That's really funny. That hadn't occurred to me, but of course. And then artists, usually relatively skeevy artists, of artists of varying degrees of skeeve, put it that way. But like definitely sexual threat is implicit in all of that, even from your Silicon Valley wizards. When they start to identify themselves as such, there is that aura of sexual threat. Whereas with witches, like you have the sort of there is the sort of trans-exclusionary, misandrist, feminist tranche of like witchdom.
yeah.
But a lot of it is more just, like here's a way of self-actualizing as a woman and sort of reclaiming femininity. So I think that it doesn't come with the same kind of immediate like sense of impending doom that you get from the idea of wizards in culture.
True, though a lot of the books I've read that are witch positive, Payback is a Witch, of course, immediately comes up, but there's ones that are better written. And I've found that increasingly they tend not to work for me. And I think that part of that is that a lot of the sort of, if you're doing a lot of sort of Wiccan or neo-pagan inflected witchcraft modern fantasy, especially like modern urban fantasy or a modern like contemporary this world fantasy, not necessarily urban, there is this, either it tends to be fairly gender essentialist, or it's trying so hard not to be gender essentialist that it ends up losing out on a lot of the things that make it weird. It ends up feeling very sanitized.
Yes.
And I think that, I actually think that sort of the fantasy reading culture is going to need to have kind of a reckoning with, what can we get out of this old school essentialist feminism that isn't turfiness and isn't just completely sanitizing it into something bland and
into an aesthetic, essentially.
Yes, into an aesthetic, but into like an empty aesthetic.
Yeah. As we're recording this, we just released the Saint of Bright Doors episode, and you have a classic witch and a classic wizard.
Yes. That's such a good book.
Yes. And yeah, it's all about different modes of manipulation. Bad moms and bad dads overlap in terms of the sort of the classic manipulative tactics, but there's the absent wizard father who withholds everything and the witch who you wish would withhold everything.
Right, exactly.
All up in your business at all times.
Yeah, no, that's actually, that episode does a great job of getting to a lot of what we just talked about. So, right. But also great question. Thank you, Kiana.
Yes, thank you.
That's awesome. All right, the next one is for you, Isaac.
Since being radicalized by podcasts, have any of your opinions on books from the first 2 years of the podcast noticeably changed? Are there any books you regard more poorly or much better now? I remember the podcast mentioning Ideology and Divine Endurance, for example. So the whole, I hate to break kayfabe, but the whole radicalized by podcast thing is largely a joke. To the extent that to the extent that I have been radicalized, I was radicalized by working at the post office during the pandemic. And it's not so much that my political views have changed, because I've always felt this way about wealth and inequality, and I've always been this way about imperialism. It's more that my faith in things changing without the Saint of Bright Doors like use of directed violence has really waned over the past 2 years. I would say that in terms of like the way that I would approach books on the podcast, I'm not likely to have changed my political stance on any of the critiques. But in the early days, I think that I didn't feel as free to sort of get into stuff as I do now. Like I was thinking about, would I feel differently about the Barbara Cormorant books, for example, which were very cynical. You know, now that I myself am feeling more cynical than I was, and the answer is no. But what I would have said was that I didn't say at the time because I would have not felt comfortable saying it, is that the thing that really turned me off of that book is how horny the sexual violence against women felt in those books, even, you know, as it was a bad thing in capital letters. So it's more that, you know, these days I just feel more comfortable talking about, you know, about what comes to my head. And like, you know, they're the sort of maybe the place where it might come up as like sort of cherry inheritors, like Lecky and Arkady Martine, but I think they're both hard-nosed enough that I'm not going to be like, oh, this is naive, you know, as a general matter.
Yeah.
You know, no, I don't think that really my political interactions with these books will have changed. And honestly, like, as far as Divine Endurance goes, you know, I've never really, like, the major sort of ideological complaint about that would be that this is a white woman writing it, and I've never really put much stock in that because the author's dead. So.
Yep.
Cultural appropriation is the least important consequence of colonialism, but it's also the easiest to fix via our consumption habits, and that's how we'd love to do politics. This is why it gets a disproportionate amount of attention. You can't shame someone online for resource extraction and expect them to give up their emerald mine lest they be cancelled.
And yeah, I mean, also, both of us tend to care less about. I mean, we'll get mad about ideology, but that's usually when we're getting mad about ideology, it's because we didn't enjoy the prose or the plotting or the characterization or the voice. We tend to grade. You and I both tend to grade on a curve if it presses our particular buttons.
Yeah, and it's like I mean, the thing about it is that I'm an art person, you know. Like I don't think that I have a very, I would hope, realistic sense of like what effect art can have on the world, which is not a whole lot, but you know, but maybe a lot in terms of its effects on giving individual people hope and comfort, you know. And so it's like, I'll forgive a lot if the art is good, is sort of basically how I tend to shake out.
Yeah.
The next question isn't specifically for you, but it is essentially for you.
If someone asks you about going to grad school, what do you tell them? A context from the asker. I finished my PhD. Glad I'm a doctor. When people ask me, my knee-jerk response is no, don't, lol. I mean, yes, the obvious answer is no, don't. Why don't? I mean, so everyone talks about the job market, but let's be real. Basically, everybody who applies to a PhD program is going in thinking, but I will be the one to beat the numbers.
Why, it's the great American catchphrase.
Or, but I don't care about that. I'm just doing it for love of learning. And, you know, after I've gotten my 5 to 7 years of being paid sub-minimum wage, but just enough to scrape by on, then I'll go off and get a real career.
This is incidentally how people who might otherwise care enough to like do real political action end up being destroyed.
It is really hard to remain the kind of person you want to be in a hothouse, high-pressure environment designed entirely to melt down who you are and recast that material into a different mold. It is really hard to get through a PhD program and at the end still be like, I could take or leave a tenure track job. And to be like, and to not care and to really keep your values distinct. Because what grad school really wants to do is, and this is the humanities, the sciences I don't know as much about, but what the humanity grad school programs really want to do is sort of overwrite the kind of person you were with somebody who has a very specific definition of intelligence and of credibility and of value, and that these three things are deeply intertwined, and with very narrow metrics for measuring them, one of which being your ability to get a tenure track job. I know people who got jobs at in cool cities at, really highly regarded liberal arts schools, and who never really wanted to, be like a serious R1 person, and they come back from their alumni networking event at the conference being depressed because everyone is pitying them for not getting an R1 job. And so just like, the reason I say don't go to grad school is that you will turn into somebody who is not actually out there to make the world better. You'll turn into somebody has a different set of values, and often whose love of learning has really been replaced by this sort of miserable workaholic pressure. And maybe you can sort of unlearn some of that and work on some of that post-tenure, but that's a real long shot. And you're signing up for a lot more years of misery than you think. And you're probably not going to be able to affect the change that you want. So that is why don't go to grad school. Also, it's incredibly ableist and really quite normie in a way. Like, you think you're going to be hanging out with a bunch of nerds. And yes, you'll find some people to play Dungeons and Dragons with, except none of you will have time to play Dungeons and Dragons. But you'll be surrounded by a surprising amount of like really nerdy bros and the female equivalent from upper class waspy cultures.
The thing that I would add to this, and I will keep this very brief because obviously it's not my area of expertise, but two things. The thing about powerful institutions is they tend to attract the same kind of people, no matter, what the institution is and what it's supposed to be doing. That's thing one. Thing two, institutions institutionalize you. Particularly powerful institutions do that. So before you volunteer to become institutionalized, i.e. to have your personal values overwritten by the values of the institution, really look at what those values are and whether you want those to be your values, not just what they say they are, because again, that doesn't really matter.
That said, well, there are probably easier ways to get a gender neutral title. That is one of them. My final piece of advice is never go into a graduate program, never go into a PhD program that isn't going to fund you. Do not ever take debt to go into a PhD program. And honestly, only take debt to go into a master's program if there is an obvious, specific career boost that this will give you that will help you, that will allow you to pay off that debt within 5 years. Just don't do it.
Quick opinions, made up or otherwise, on sequels to stuff you've done one episode on but haven't continued, such as Baru Cormorant, Jasmine Throne, Girls of Paper and Fire. Well, so you have read some of these, and I haven't read any of these. I'll do quick made up opinions on those three, and then I'll hand it over to you. My guess is that Baru Cormorant books get more bleak and more horny in a sort of self-denying sort of way until they reach a sort of horniness, bleakness event horizon. Jasmine Throne didn't leave enough of an impression on me in the first place to really imagine what a sequel might be like. And I seriously hope the Girls of Paper and Fire got as wacky as the ending of the first book suggested that it would, and just sort of goes off in a Santa Olivia onto, Saints Astray kind of a vibe. How right am I?
Well, I haven't read the sequels to Girls of Paper and Fire. I keep meaning to, but the first book was so grueling that I feel like either the second and third books are going to continue to be grueling, or they're going to be a letdown. And either way, I just don't want to put myself through it. Baru Cormorant, the second book it very much fulfills your made-up opinion. It's quite bad, I thought. Other people loved it. The third book starts to get more interesting, though it does remain weirdly horny. But in different ways also. There's a lot more male homoerotic tension in the second and third books. But the third book gets a sense of humor back, and that makes it much more interesting, I think. Jasmine Throne, I really have to respect the author for seriously raising the stakes in the book, for not being like, okay, well, the first book established a status quo, and now we really can't wreck that. We can't break up anybody. We can't kill off or seriously threaten any of the major viewpoint characters. So shout out to Tasha Suri, I think her name is,
yes,
for doing that. And then I will also just add that the Second and third books in Machineries of Empire, the Nine Fox Gambit sequels, are not as good as the first. The third one in particular is a little bit of a letdown, but I deeply enjoy them all nonetheless. And I think if you enjoyed the first one, if you enjoyed the first one and you want more of like the characters just being really screwed up, then they will continue to provide. The sequel to Unconquerable Sun was, a bit of a slog. I'm still going to read the next one, but it was a bit of a slog, and there's a reason I did not put it on the thing. I keep meaning to read the sequel to The Unbroken and forgetting to, so I think it's probably interesting. The sequel to Midnight Lie. The sequel to The Midnight Lie is not very good, but it does, you do get to have the main character go around basically murdering everybody who was mean to her in the first book because she no longer has a conscience, and that's fun.
Yeah, that does sound fun. How about the Fire Logic sequels?
I assumed we would cover those at some point because I think that they're all quite good and interesting. I want to cover them.
Well, I imagine we will end up covering them at some point in that case, because I certainly have no objection to reading them.
Also, the prequel to The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry is very different and full of all sorts of weird gender stuff. And I feel like Tumblr could really get into it, given that, given these specific gender dynamics of like giant butch troll wife and, sort of femi bi male wife.
Yeah. I read that one too. That was a fun one. I don't think it was as good as Ruthless Lady's Guide, but at least it was written before it, and that's the direction that things are supposed to go in.
Exactly. Yes, it was not as good, but it was messier but interesting, I thought. So,
yes.
And I think that is run through all the ones that I have read the sequels of.
Yeah, no, I think that works for me. And we should get like Earth Logic on the list at some point.
Yes. Also the sequel to Foundry Side wasn't very good.
That is unsurprising. All right, next.
Besides the themed cover adjacent jingles, what's the composition process like for the jingles? Isaac, do you mostly write using the guitar itself or through other means? And how does that interact with the lyrics' words? The asker is a musician and guitarist themselves, so feel free to get technical.
Okay, and this one was from Cleve and Plow. The grad school question was from Saya, who is a longtime listener of ours. So I will tell you what the process is like. I edit the episodes, which means that I go through and if you think there's a lot of ums and uhs in the episodes, as there were more before I get done with them. That's especially true in this one. And once you notice them, you can't stop noticing them. Editing one's own voice is an exercise in narcissism, which thankfully I'm used to from recording my own music and being a narcissist. But still I listen back to some of these and I wonder if there's an intermittent carbon monoxide leak in this apartment. As I'm re-listening to the episode to edit it, I make little notes, little timestamp notes about like various things that I want to add or comment on. And I make a list, and then hopefully not too much later, because if I leave it for too long, I forget what I was talking about, and I have to sort of guess if I don't want to go back to the episode and listen to it again and try to figure out what the idea was supposed to be. But I look at the note that I left, which is, says something like, we should do Earth Logic at some point, and then I pick up my guitar and I go like, let's listen to Earth Logic sometime. And that's it. Like, you probably have noted that I have a sort of a bunch of stock chord progressions, and if I have something long to write, I'll do the old this, which I can pretty much do any kind of melody over as long as I want to. And of course the exception is if I'm going to do a parody of another song that pops into my head when I'm looking at my note, and then I go to see if there are chords available on the internet, and if there are, I try to learn the song real quick, and if there aren't, I try to figure out the song real quick, and if it passes my attention span, I just don't do it. So that's the process.
Nice.
Thank you.
I don't have much to add. I enjoy when sometimes you ask me to elaborate on a point that I wanted to make and forgot, and then you just turn that almost verbatim into a jingle.
Indeed. That's very helpful because I can just read out whatever you wrote in the Discord window or whatever over what I'm doing, and that lets me only use a little less of my brain. Also from Cleveland Plow, I listened to the episodes out of order, so I'm not sure how recent the news of Alexa's engagement was, but in any case, how's the wedding planning been going, and do you have any tips? I'm getting married next year, and in between the stress of logistics, it's been a novel challenge to think about what traditions we want to eschew, emphasize, and or establish, the 3 E's. How have you approached those decisions? Anything you're particularly excited about?
Aw, thank you for asking. Well, Leora's been doing a lot of the logistics wedding planning, so I suppose one tip is, have a fiance who's really into this stuff. For some of the stuff with traditions, we're doing except for the gay thing, it's a fairly traditional Jewish wedding. So there's a lot of stuff that's already set. And so, that kind of helps. I think my main takeaway about weddings is that a useful thing about a wedding is that it's a great way to dig up a lot of cultural differences that you and your, prospective spouse have before you, sign the paperwork and commit to something that's going to be much more difficult to undo. So, it gives you a real chance to pull this stuff up and process it while also watching how the other person performs under stress and under a lot of pressure from, their family and friends and society. So, like, for example, you might learn that one of you thinks that a 100-person wedding is gigantic and ridiculously large, while the other one thinks that 100 people is ridiculously small, and their, family thinks that it's that it is so embarrassingly small that it's almost un-Jewish.
Yes.
So
things are difficult for me to wrap my head around.
So I think, because you say in between the stress of logistics, it's been a novel challenge. Just keep reminding yourself that this is not for your family. This is not for your friends. This is for you and your spouse to have, the kind of party that you want to have. To mark signing a bunch of paperwork and getting healthcare and hospital visitation rights. So when you get pressure like that, do your best to ignore it. But really, the two of you need to work together and figure out what is it that actually brings you guys joy. What is it that feels true to you guys? And when your in-laws inevitably start inviting other people without telling you, you can have your say, no, actually, that's not what we're doing. But I think that it is nonetheless going to be exciting, even though I hate giant events full of people. I am looking forward to all the Jewish ritual, and I'm looking forward to being in the farmer's market. I'm looking forward to getting to turn this relationship into something official with healthcare and hospital visitation rights, in a way that we hope at least will be symbolically meaningful.
Indeed. I look forward to attending it and seeing how that all shakes out.
That's right.
I got married a little over a year ago, and what it basically did was establish that Kiana and I had exactly the same ideas about what we wanted to do, which was as little as possible, and without any outside, with the minimum number of human beings there. And that is what we did. So, what that taught us, I think, was that we will turn into complete hermits if we're not careful. So we're trying not to complete that journey as a pair.
Adnan gave us each a question. I will read the one for Isaac, which is, the one for me is, if you had to be a wizard, what kind of wizard would you be? And then for Isaac, if you had to be a lesbian, what kind of lesbian would you be?
Indeed, and they give examples of types
right.
of
So what kind of wizard would I be? Enchanter, conjurer, necromancer, etc. I have no idea about vibes. Isaac, maybe you can give me a wizard type based on vibes. Based on actual life experience with the aforementioned PhD, I feel like I'm the sort of wizard who, did the whole wizardy thing and then broke my staff and retired to the woods to be a hermit, but will, advise other young wizards when they come, mostly to do something else with their lives.
Let's see here. I think that you could do like a good line in Petty Tyranny, if that had been offered to you as a if it had been specifically something that you had just sort of been born into, or the other way around. You could be the sort of terrifying but ultimately kind of head of household sort of version of wizard, sort of Howl in Howl's Moving Castle kind of a deal.
Yes, that would be great, honestly, because who doesn't want a moving castle and the ability to be as self-indulgent and distractible as they want?
Indeed. As for me, if I had to be a lesbian, what kind of lesbian would I be?
Sword, useless, space atrocities, etc.
I love these lesbian categories. Space. I think that we're pioneering the space atrocity lesbian as an idea, which I appreciate. But the thing is that if you gave me any more like reasons to be othered, I would get like geometrically more insufferable with each one. So I would be the very butch, very disabled, very angry lesbian who would never let you forget about my pain. Like shaven head, much as I do now, and like
you would just be extremely on Twitter then, and that would be awful.
Yes, it's for the best. It's for the best that I'm not, but that I think that's sort of where I would be.
See, I assumed you would be like I actually don't think that is true. I think that you would end up being more like Rainbow.
I mean I thought about that. Like, it sort of, it depends on how much of my goofiness would have survived the process of growing up gay. If I manage to retain my sort of my childishness and goofiness, then I think Rainbow is sort of the best case. So no, I think that I'll take that. There would be leather jackets involved. I would be butch because at the end of the day, I am a dude. God, there was something else there, but I've forgotten. Oh yeah, no, I would also. The other option is like just the most terrifyingly publicly kinky person that you can imagine. Like hanging from things at Burning Man kind of a deal. What piece of media would you love to cover on the podcast, but your co-host won't go for it? I actually can't. I honestly don't think that there's anything on this list. Like, there are a few things that I want us to cover that you've said that you will. It's more of a question of when. I didn't think that I was going to get you to do Crow Killers, but you say that when it's done you will. So like,
provided that I can get it in a
in
a non-online readable form.
Really, the obstacle here is not so much like what the media is, but what the format is. And it's like, we've discussed that like movies are extremely challenging for both of us, and for various reasons, and also just like we can't do a 16-hour video game. But I would love to do a bonus episode on Disco Elysium at one point, and even that you've said that you might play Disco Elysium.
Yeah, so. Just at least enough to get a sense of what all the Tumblr jokes are about.
Right. Anything on your end?
I don't think so. I mean, the ones that you've struck, because you've used your veto 3 times each time, because twice because you got really bored, and a third time because it was making you unhappy. And I guess of those 3, Thistlefoot is the one that was making you unhappy would be the one I would be more interested in doing. I think that there's some of the ones on the maybes I haven't brought up because I'm not sure how you will take to them.
Right.
So
there's a certain degree of self-censorship involved here.
Yeah. But I feel like if there's something that I was really excited to, because I guess part of it is that there's also, if it's something I like and I know you'll hate, then it's not
going to be a fun episode.
It's not going to be a fun episode. And, if it's something that I think you will have strongly mixed feelings about, then that could be a fun episode. But generally, these days, you use your veto if you if you aren't enjoying it, and that's smart. So, yeah, I don't think there's anything that I feel like I would do, but you won't go for it.
Cool. Well, that's good. That's good to hear. We're mostly on the same page as far as that goes.
Having not listened to all the episodes, have you covered any works that include lesbian wizards and/or wizard lesbians? If not, please speculate on their existence. Pursuant to this, thoughts on Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood?
This is from Cleveland Plow again. Thank you for mentioning Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, which is indeed a game that features witches, which definitely feel more like wizards to me. Yes, we absolutely have. We have a long list of lesbian wizards.
Starting with Harrowhark.
Payback's a Witch has female wizards. Sappho's Bar and Grill has female wizards. Baru Cormorant has female wizards. The City in the Middle of the Night has female wizards. Empress of Forever has female wizards. Breath of the Sun, The Outside. Plenty of female wizards to go around. Even with the wizard witch dichotomy that we said. Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood is it's a very strange little game, which is supposed to be supposed to be a tarot deck building game, but it's more just like a standard piece of interactive fiction. It's very suddenly turns into a game about electioneering halfway through, which is startling but really fun. But yeah, no, it's full of it is full of, sort of classic feminist witches who feel much more like wizards, given the way that they behave and struggle over power. So I think that was a very, you kind of put your finger on it there with that question, Cleveland Plow. Depending on how you play it, it could be wizards versus lesbians, because the behemoth could be a sort of demon lover figure, making the witches into more wizard-like figures. But I didn't want to do any of the dating sim stuff, so I just focused on the election.
Yeah.
All right, so as a finale, or not almost a finale, there's one more thing after it. I did ask people to send in things that we had not, that they had no reason to believe that we had consumed, that we would make up opinions about him if we haven't. So here we go. Honkai Impact 3rd. It's a Chinese gacha game. It's probably bad that it exists.
Yeah.
would be my made up opinion about that.
Yeah, gacha is just bad. Sorry.
Yes. And if there is a plot, Wikipedia won't tell me what it is.
Right. I tried to figure out what was going on by reading the fandom wiki for it, and got bored and distracted very quickly.
Yes.
So.
Life is Strange Season 1. I remember that this was sort of part of a collection of progressive lesbian video games that came out around the same time as the sort of progressive lesbian comic boom was happening. And I never played it because I thought it looked lame compared to many of the others. But I think that is sort of in the same basket as Gone Home.
I keep mixing it up with Gone Home. That's my real problem. I've seen Life is Strange. That's the one that has the photographer girl and also a blue-haired girl, maybe, but they're different.
Yes.
Okay.
Whereas Gone Home is a first-person game about coming back to your house to figure out what happened to your sister in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. Gone Home I have on Steam, but I've never played. Life is Strange I've never played and don't have. But I think I feel like I saw a lot of fan art for it on Tumblr at a point in the past.
Gone Home is a fine use of, an hour of your time, but it's nothing. It's one of those things that was a cultural moment and it is pretty much interesting only in light of the controversies that came after it. But these games both sort of were Gamergate catalysts. The modern gaming community really likes to pretend that Gamergate never happened, which is interesting.
Which is interesting because I feel like the science fiction community has not forgotten the puppies in the same way. And the puppies, I feel like, are, were somewhat influenced by Gamergate. Or the other way around.
Yeah, I
feel like they're both part of this sort of reactionary moment.
This is true.
The science fiction community seems to have a longer memory, or maybe it's just that every time there's more hero-related shenanigans, everybody goes, oh no, it's the puppies all over again.
I think it's also, in terms of gaming has come up to other controversies at this point, and part of that is just that it's a scene that's so huge that it self-silos, which I don't think SF is.
Yeah.
It's not really big enough to break off into its own little groups, but also I think that it's become clear to just about everyone that the things that are making games bad is capitalism.
Yeah.
So, we didn't end up, as a community becoming radicalized. Isaac the gamer. But I feel like, it's a very, very big house. Gaming. But
the Kieran Gillen, Jamie McKelvey comic series, The Wicked and the Divine.
Looks like sort of derivative post Sandman glurge to me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know. If it's got it Sandman plus lesbians who don't die horribly, there's something.
That's an improvement,
there.
Certainly. Yeah. But I've got Kill 6 Billion Demons, so.
Yeah, there's that. It is true that a lot of the sort of somewhat more mainstream Sandman influenced comics don't stand up to Kill 6 Billion Demons, which is just really good. And once it finishes, we'll have to absolutely do.
Indeed. Hannah, 2011. As far as I could tell, this seems to be sort of in the line of movies / media where it's like Green, where what if there was a really traumatized girl who was also super badass and could kill everybody? More or less sexualized.
Isn't that also River from Firefly?
Yeah, it's River from Firefly, and it's also sort of a part of you can go back to La Femme Nikita and various female assassin movies. The French are particularly fond of this kind of thing. Yeah, I would read Valkyrie instead, probably.
We already covered Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood. Actually, I have read some volumes of Witch Hattatelier, if it's the one I'm thinking it is. And
it begins in a very Earthsea fashion. I read a volume of it.
It does. It feels very Earthsea. It feels a little bit Diana Wynne Jones. And I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting, and I like that it starts out being a story about inborn magic, and then quickly, which is the sort of thing that I hate, and then quickly turns into no, actually this is about class and, powerful people keeping their secrets. And then really leans into what are the implications there and what happens when this starts to get destabilized. And so that I thought was really interesting. And it has a bunch of different views on how this might impact different kinds of disabilities, including what new ways are there to be disabled in this kind of system, and also what ways can what new adaptive assistive devices can we have with this magic. So I thought it was very well thought out, and my only problem with it is that the pacing is a bit slow and that the library ran out of volumes.
Yeah, no, it seemed good to me. Just sort of in that there's a sort of a boom of manga that uses Western fantasy tropes to do sociology, basically.
Yeah.
Which Dungeon Meshi is sort of is definitely one of those.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of a very anthropological, sociologically informed approach to really picking apart the culture is where a lot of the Earthsea vibes come from. There's a very strong Le Guin vibe to this one.
Indeed, and I approve generally of those.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yes. just at the last minute, we got a question from, hang on. Last minute enough that I don't know the name. We got a very last minute question from Mary Ellen Carter, who asks us to compare and contrast these apocalypse media.
And any others we care to.
Which is good. A Canticle for Leibowitz, Mr. Burns, and they've written an electric play, but I believe it's called a post-electric play. Station 11, and a book called Shades of Grey, not to be confused with
50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey, which came out after 50 Shades of Grey, which shows great bravery in the face of search engine optimization or an attempt to get people to buy his book by accident.
I don't think either, given that it's Jasper Fforde who writes who writes either very early YA or slightly, I think it's slightly advanced middle grade fantasy.
Yes. It would be shelved in a completely different part.
Yes.
The second review of Shades of Grey on Goodreads was my book group was reading 50 Shades of Grey, which first of all, nightmare to begin with, and I bought this by accident instead, and I'm really happy I did. So it worked on at least one person.
So I have read A Canticle for Leibowitz, and I have read. Yeah, in fact, I believe that I left your copy in China.
Thanks.
And I have read other Jasper Fforde series. Plus, I skimmed the Wikipedia article for Shades of Grey, and so I actually feel like I have a fairly good sense of what's going on with that one too. Mr. Burns' Electric Plays looks a lot like the sort of thing that you would either absolutely love or hate.
Oh, so I've fittingly, given what the thing is about, I've had various of my leftist podcasters explain what Mr. Burns' A Post-Electric Play is to me, in podcast form. So
you're just somebody with deep feelings about The Simpsons.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely am. But it's more a bit. So Mr. Burns in A Post-Electric Play is about people in a post-electric society, as you might think, who are falling back on an oral tradition and are are trying to, I believe it's Last Exit to Springfield, one of the very best and most classic Simpsons episodes. They are attempting to Cape Fear, actually. That's the one with the bit where he keeps stepping on the rake. Retell that as part of the oral tradition, without fully understanding the culture that it came from, or a complete picture of what The Simpsons actually was, which is a great idea. IMO. And Station 11, which I just read the Wikipedia entry for, and it seems to be a book about a bunch of traveling players in a post-apocalyptic, in this case, post-pandemic America.
Yeah, that's a book that I was on I kept meaning to read list, and then COVID hit, and I just don't feel
exactly.
like it. And Shades of Grey really looks like, what if post Hunger Games Cash In Boom, but written by Jasper Fforde.
Right. So as far as comparing and contrasting these, and any other apocalypse media that I care to, I think that that Mr. Burns and Station 11 certainly have a couple of things in common, and this is there's a sort of a coming cozy apocalypse vibe. I call it soft apocalypse.
Yeah.
The thing that always comes to mind is the gentle lesbian manga about a robot sort of going on a motorcycle road.
The one with the tea shop. Oh, it's funny because a lot of the cozy apocalypse stuff I don't actually like very much, but I really love that manga, so.
The name of the manga is Yokohama Kai Dashikiko. And this term soft apocalypse was coined by Tumblr user A Wayward Mind, as far as I know. I think that it can be done well or poorly,
Yeah.
And when it's done well, it's like, it's not so much about the end of society as it is about death, and accepting death and accepting loss and grieving. The ones like Mr. Burns and Station 11, and again, this is just, going off of what I know about them, having not actually seen or read them, it feels like a sort of a culture-wide longing for a much simpler way of life, which actually may tie in with the whole, doing sociology via D&D thing that we were discussing earlier. People really just want things. People want the internet to go away. It's sort of how I would sum it up. It's like people are alienated. People are frustrated with being alienated. People want to not have the stories that they love, taken away from them and recontextualized a million times. People want to go back to telling stories to each other in person. It's not really going to happen. So,
I mean, I think that I would suggest, having also, again, not read these or watched them, but I think part of it is also trying to find hope, trying to find an outlet, a way out of climate despair. Because we're all sort of living in this sense of that the world is going to end. And if we're going to, say, have children or just be invested at all in a future, you have to imagine something looking radically different. And some people do this by going completely sunny into like solar punk stuff. But I think a lot of other people sort of think, okay, what if all the bad things that I feel like are hanging over my head and everyone else's head, what if they happened? And first of all, wouldn't there be some relief that the worst is over? And then, second of all, is there still a future for us in a world when we cannot continue the kind of world that we have? So, I think when they work well, it is when they're both about death, but when they can but also about the next generation that comes after you die and lose things, which the tea house coffee shop robot one that I really like definitely does. There are children in that, and it does talk about what their futures are going to look like. So when they come off as being sort of reactionary, wouldn't it be so much nicer if we lived in this cozy world where we didn't have the internet anymore? That's when I tend to find them very unsatisfying, I think.
Yeah, that's a sort of the kind of pastoral nostalgia that is one of the classic precursors of fascism.
So none of these are anything like A Canticle for Leibowitz, which is just extremely, extremely Catholic and extremely depressing.
Yes, I would. I shouldn't have read A Canticle for Leibowitz in middle school, is all that I will say about that. It was not the most weirdly ironic thing to read while I was spending a year in China. That was definitely Stand on Zanzibar. But you did get me a new copy of Stand on Zanzibar, which I very much appreciate.
But the thing is it's so Catholic. Right? Like the world keeps, humanity is inherently sinful and doomed to destroy each other through through nuclear power over and over and over again. And even as it's happening, the people who are trying, and there's this idea that everybody, if not for their Catholic faith, will default to euthanasia. And
yes.
And also there is still this sort of slightly weird nostalgia for, but then at least we will have all illuminated manuscripts again, and won't that be beautiful, even as the mutants will, murder our monks.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't know if I've said it on this podcast, but the Catholic intellectual, the Catholic science fiction writer, the Catholic cosmologist, some of the weirdest shit that you're ever going to encounter in this world. And I tend to view it as sort of like somebody staring through the bars of a cage at somebody who's at a very I should probably not end that sentence, but, when I used to browse the web when I was young, I came across all sorts of freaks, as you do, but usually I could tell where they were coming from. But occasionally you'd run across somebody who was very smart and very funny, and then they just launch into some of the most hateful shit imaginable, and you'd have no idea how they got from point A to point B. Later I learned that the missing element in my understanding was the rosary. It's definitely something.
And regarding Shades of Grey, which I've not read and never will, I feel like this is yet another example of books that kind of missed the point of the Hunger Games.
What would you call the point of the Hunger Games?
So there's this whole post-Hunger Games cash-in, which was basically, what if dystopian but Sorting Hat?
Right.
And the Hunger Games doesn't...
We love Sorting Hat.
We love Sorting Hat. And the Hunger Games doesn't do that. I mean, people are from districts, but that's just about your baseline regional culture and, you know, it isn't about your inherent self. But the thing is that the point of the Hunger Games is that expecting teenagers to be heroes and putting the hopes of your rebellion on teenagers is a terrible idea, and all you end up with is extremely traumatized teenagers who can't even really provide you with the good television ops that you're hoping for because they're teenagers. And that really the only happy ending for children who are forced to be heroes is to be left alone with their PTSD for the rest of their lives.
And for those of you who are wondering about real life evidence of this, I will direct you to the Cultural Revolution.
Right. You know, so it's, and all the other books basically go, but, you know, wouldn't it be awesome if you, the teenager, get to bring down society, you know, this society, because what's wrong with society is that it has a sorting hat, but also the sorting hat is really cool. So, like, the Hunger Games in some ways still feels relevant because it's also sort of about what, you know, being forced into a social, you know, into like a media image does to young people and everybody else. And I don't feel like, you know, Divergent or a lot of these others necessarily are going to have that kind of long-running sense of relevance.
That was an excellent point. Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much right. Before we leave that, besides the motorcycle tea shop anime, or manga, which I will look up the name of and put in here, do you have any favorite apocalypse fiction? I enjoy Zone 1 by Colson Whitehead. The single best piece of zombie apocalypse media ever created, which, because that's a very low bar.
I mean, I will give a negative shout out to World War Z, which I thought was appallingly bad. It was like being just smugly lectured to by some guy who did a study abroad year in China and thinks he's an expert on global affairs.
Yeah, no, the quickest way to demonstrate to me that you are a person who I want to get away from very quickly as a general matter is to be very into zombie movies, or zombie apocalypse stuff. Not like, you know, the Evil Dead stuff, not the comedy stuff, but like, you know, it generally doesn't bode well in terms of the racial and political readings of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why Zone 1 kind of worked. Also because it's just real depressing.
Oh yeah, I mean, Colson Whitehead.
Exactly. So yeah, I guess I don't really like post-apocalyptic stuff very much. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think because I don't actually agree with most people's vision of what a post-apocalyptic world will look like.
What, in your opinion, is the difference?
Well, so I think a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff is, you know, that's what I said, but I think a lot of other post-apocalyptic stuff is about what if people like me suddenly had the advantage in society. Right? You know, if you look at actual historical apocalypses, generally what you get is a ton of dead people, and a lot of lost stuff, and, you know, and then like a variety of transformations which are not nearly as wholesale as you think.
Yeah, it turns out that the people who have the advantage when things go tits up are the existing elites usually.
Well, they're not necessarily. Like in the wake of the Black Plague, you get you get suddenly the rise of more empowered workers because suddenly labor is real scarce. And in the wake of the Taiping Rebellion, which was, pretty apocalyptic in China, what you get is empowered local militias. So the thing about an apocalypse usually is because it's destabilizing society, one of the things you're getting, it can be a moment, it's this transitional moment where either the elites get to crack down, and in which case you're not really getting an apocalypse, you're just getting, things are getting worse, or because there's no longer central power and central, infrastructure, you get a ton of death, but in the wake of that, you often get more local power. And whether or not that's good kind of depends. I mean, in the case of the Qing, it limped along for a while, and things just got worse and worse and worse before it fell. Or everybody dies, or enough people die that you really cannot continue whatever society you have, and that usually ends up being a tragedy, not something, not a cool adventure story.
Right, exactly. And, either way, like when, society falls apart, it tends to be, it's not that you personally are stronger and well armed enough. It's that you have the cultural connections to take advantage of, and the cultural connections and a certain amount of wealth to take advantage of the disruption. Yes, so those are all of the questions, and I would like to, I'd like to talk briefly to the Anon who sent us paragraphs of text about how The Last Unicorn is like Homestuck. I apologize if I've given people the impression that I want to talk about Homestuck.
Right.
The fact that I keep bringing it up is because it ate like 5 years of my life. But I don't want to talk about it anymore as a general matter. To the person who, if you are the same person who said that we should cover Detective Pony, no. You may notice that in the Detective Pony movie, that's me. That's my voice playing Dirk. I've had enough. I've had enough. I can only say that I've had enough, and there will be no more in-depth Homestuck discussion on this podcast ever. And if that is what you're after, please send these questions to Malo, who is always more than happy to read a book that might be tangentially related to Homestuck and talk about it, which I am absolutely not.
And Malo has, really interesting, thoughtful opinions on Homestuck. So
indeed. So you mentioned Malo in your ask, so go bother the boy. He's my friend in real life. He can take it out on me. But all right, I think that's just about it.
Yeah.
Thanks again to everybody for sending in questions.
Yes, thank you. This is always fun.
It is always fun. And next week we will be recording Night in the Woods, and I'll get to talk more about being radicalized by video games and various other things, and about furries.
Indeed.
So see you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.